The Paris Opera House was old, older than the city seemed to remember. Its opulent marble columns and towering arches stood as a testament to grandeur, a relic of a time when art and elegance masked the shadows that clung to its corners. I had arrived for the opening night of a new production, lured by whispers of a mysterious patron funding the whole thing, someone who preferred to remain hidden in the depths of the theater. They said this was to be the grandest performance since the Phantom haunted these halls. But legends like that, they fade into folklore, don't they? Just ghost stories to give the tourists a little thrill. The moment I stepped into the grand foyer, I felt it. A creeping unease, like the walls themselves were watching. The chandeliers above flickered slightly, casting uneven light across the audience gathering below. The excitement in the air was palpable, but so was something else. Something cold. My seat was near the stage, close enough to feel the heat of the spotlights, but distant enough to remain out of the performer's gaze. It was a prime spot, but tonight I wished I had chosen somewhere further back. I had seen enough horror films, read enough terrifying tales to know when something wasn't right. The heavy red velvet curtains loomed before me, unmoving. But beyond them I could feel something. The rumors had started weeks ago. First, it was the set designer, a woman found dead in her apartment, her body twisted in an unnatural position, a look of absolute terror etched on her face. No sign of foul play, the papers had said. But I heard otherwise, rumors, whispers that her death had something to do with the production. That she had been in the opera house late one night and had seen something she wasn't meant to. Then came the accidents, a chandelier falling during rehearsals, narrowly missing the lead actress, a prop sword slicing too deep during a fight scene. The cast was on edge and so was the crew. Some had started to leave, but others, they stayed, drawn to the dark allure of the production as if something was pulling them deeper into the fold. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. The first notes of the orchestra rang out, sweet, eerie, pulling us into the story. For a moment I forgot the tension in the air. I forgot the way the shadows seemed to move just beyond the edge of my vision. The performance began and the lead actress stepped onto the stage. Her voice was captivating, soaring through the opera house with a power that gripped your soul. But then it happened. A figure appeared in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the stage lights. It was a flicker at first, a subtle shift in the darkness, barely noticeable. I blinked, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was there, a man, tall and cloaked, standing at the edge of the stage, watching. The actress didn't see him. No one else did. But I did. The orchestra swelled, the music rising to a fever pitch. My pulse quickened, and I found myself gripping the edge of my seat. I wanted to stand, to shout out a warning, but something held me back. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the music stopped. Silence. The lead actress faltered, her voice breaking as she glanced nervously to the side. Her eyes darted to the wings, where the figure had been moments before, but now it was gone. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure if this was part of the show or not. And then the scream came. Blood-curdling, piercing, unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't from the actress. It wasn't even from someone on stage. It came from above. I looked up, my heart racing. The chandelier above me swayed, the heavy crystals clinking together like bones. In the dim light, I could see it, blood, dripping slowly, methodically from the ceiling. A slow, wet splatter that echoed in the silence of the hall. The audience erupted into chaos. People scrambled from their seats, rushing for the exits as the chandelier swayed ominously above. I stayed frozen in place, my eyes locked on the dark spot from which the blood was leaking. My mind raced with disbelief, with terror. And then I saw it, a hand. Pale, skeletal, reaching out from a crack in the ceiling. The fingers twitched, the nails long and blackened, as if the hand had clawed its way out from the very walls of the opera house. The Phantom had returned. But this wasn't the romanticized specter from the stories. This was something older, darker, and far more dangerous. I tore my eyes away from the scene above just in time to see the lead actress collapse on stage, her eyes wide open in terror. The last note of her song hung in the air like a curse. The lights flickered, and in the brief darkness I saw him again. The figure. This time, he was closer, standing in the aisle, his face obscured by a mask. But I could feel his eyes on me, and then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The panic in the opera house was palpable. People were screaming, pushing past each other to escape. But I knew. I knew there was no escape. Not now. Not from him. Because the Phantom of the Paris Opera had returned. And this time, he wasn't here for love. He was here for revenge. The opera house emptied quickly, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The once grand and opulent theater was now a cacophony of screaming voices, heavy footsteps, and the relentless creak of the chandelier swinging above. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was stuck on that figure, the one standing in the aisle, the one who seemed to be watching me. the one whose face I hadn't been able to see, but whose presence lingered like a dark stain on the air. The blood dripping from the ceiling had slowed to a trickle, congealing on the floor in thick, sticky puddles. It was a sight that should have sent me running like everyone else, but instead I was drawn in, unable to shake the feeling that I was meant to see this, to witness whatever it was that had awakened in this cursed place. A loud thud echoed from the stage, pulling me out of my trance. The lead actress, her body was still there, unmoving, lifeless. Her eyes, once filled with emotion and passion for the performance, were now dull and glazed over, wide in an expression of terror. Her throat had been slit, the crimson slash almost too perfect, too precise. I stood, heart racing, but my legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else. I managed to stumble my way toward the stage, my feet sticking to the floor where blood had soaked into the ornate carpets. As I got closer, the temperature seemed to drop. I could see my breath misting in the air, swirling like the ghosts of those who had performed here long ago. The doors to the opera house slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I jumped, spinning around to see if anyone else had remained inside. But no, I was alone. Alone with her. Alone with him. The figure. He was back. I didn't see him at first. It was like he melted out of the shadows themselves, materializing at the edge of the stage. The dim lights above cast long, jagged shadows across his face, but I could make out the mask. Not the delicate, elegant half-mask the legend spoke of, but something crude, distorted, made of bone, or perhaps something worse. His eyes, cold, black pools of emptiness, locked onto mine, and I felt an icy wave of dread wash over me. I told them to stop, a voice rasped from beneath the mask. It was like the voice had been dragged across broken glass, every word scraping the air with a harsh, grating sound. But they wouldn't listen. I swallowed hard, trying to speak, but no words would come. My throat felt like it had closed up, my mouth dry as desert dust. He stepped forward, gliding across the stage as though he weren't bound by the same laws of reality as the rest of us. I could see the trail of blood beneath his feet, but he left no footprints. They thought they could bury the past, he whispered. They thought they could make me disappear. I took a step back, stumbling as my heel caught on the edge of the aisle. I had to get out, had to escape. But something about his presence pinned me there, rooted to the spot. It was as though the very walls of the opera house had conspired to keep me trapped. The history of this place, the blood, the madness, it wasn't just a story anymore. It was real, and it was standing right in front of me. You... His voice drifted off, a low growl reverberating through the room. His attention shifted to the lifeless body of the actress. Slowly, almost reverently, he knelt beside her, brushing a hand over her pale cheek. Another one, he said, his voice soft but laced with something cruel. They never learn. The actress's body jerked suddenly, her back arching in an unnatural, grotesque way. I gasped, stumbling backward as her limbs twisted, her mouth opening in a silent scream. The blood on the floor bubbled, and her body convulsed, as if something was trying to claw its way out of her. I turned, ready to run, but the sound of her bones snapping made me stop cold. It was the kind of sound you can never forget, like the cracking of wood in a fire, only wetter, more sickening. She was standing now, her head lolled to one side, a grotesque puppet on invisible strings, her eyes wide and vacant. The cut on her throat had stopped bleeding, but the wound itself seemed to pulse, dark and gaping. The figure rose beside her, tilting his head, studying me. She belongs to me now, he whispered. The actress took a step forward. Her movements were jerky, wrong, as though her body was being controlled by something otherworldly, something malevolent. The blood from her wound had started to spread, leaking like dark ink across her once pristine dress. I backed away, my eyes darting to the doors. They were still shut, heavy and unmoving. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I had to get out. She lunged. Her arms, now twisted and broken, reached out for me. I threw myself to the side, hitting the floor hard. My breath left me in a sharp gasp, but I didn't have time to recover. She was coming, and behind her the figure, watching, waiting. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting toward the nearest side door. My hands fumbled for the handle, slick with sweat and blood. I pulled. Nothing. The door was locked. Behind me I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps of the figure. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. "This is only the beginning," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty opera house. "You can't escape. No one ever escapes." My heart was thundering in my ears as I pulled at the door, praying for it to open. But as his footsteps drew closer, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't meant to escape. I was meant to stay, just like her. I turned around, my back against the door, and there they were, him and the thing that had once been the actress, standing together in the dim light. His mask was grinning now, wide and jagged, a grotesque parody of a smile. "You belong to me now," he whispered, taking one final step toward me. And then the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. I could feel it pressing against my skin, cold and suffocating, as if the opera house itself had swallowed me whole. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps, the silence so thick it felt alive. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead, frozen in place by the overwhelming dread that coursed through me. For a few moments there was nothing. No sound, no light, just the oppressive weight of the blackness. But then I heard it. Faint at first, almost imperceptible. A low, guttural whisper crawling up from the very bowels of the opera house. "You're mine." It was him. The Phantom. His voice slithered through the darkness like a serpent, wrapping itself around my mind, tightening its grip with every word. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt like it had been clamped shut, the terror too great to let anything out. Suddenly a flicker of light. Dim, almost like a candle struggling to stay lit, and then it grew, revealing the stage once again. But it was different now. The grand set pieces were gone, replaced by a skeletal framework of rusted iron beams and torn curtains. The once beautiful opera house had transformed into something twisted, decayed, like a corpse long forgotten beneath the city streets. And in the center of it all stood him. The Phantom. He no longer stood in the shadows. Now he was fully illuminated, and the sight of him made my blood run cold. His mask was gone, revealing the ruined face beneath. A grotesque mockery of a human visage, his skin melted and twisted as if burned beyond recognition. His eyes, black hollow pits, bored into me, filled with an unfathomable malice. But it wasn't just him. Behind him, emerging from the darkness like phantoms themselves, were others. Figures draped in tattered costumes, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes sunken and lifeless. They moved with an eerie fluidity, as if they were being pulled by invisible strings. And as they came closer, I realized with a sickening jolt that they were the cast. The dead. Every actor and actress who had fallen victim to the curse of the opera house. Their faces were frozen in expressions of sheer terror, their bodies twisted and broken, just like the lead actress before. They surrounded him, like a macabre chorus, their mouths hanging open in silent screams. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This wasn't just a curse. It was something far older, far darker. The opera house was a prison, a tomb, and these poor souls had been trapped here, bound to this place by the Phantom's twisted will. I turned to run, my hands scrambling against the walls, desperate for an escape. But every door, every window was gone. The exit had vanished, replaced by solid, impenetrable stone. And then I heard it again. That sound, the whisper. "You were never meant to leave." My skin crawled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I spun around, and there he was, closer now, his mangled face mere feet from mine. His breath was rancid, like the stench of something long dead. And as he spoke, I could see the jagged, broken teeth behind his lips. "They thought they could bury me," he rasped. "But I always come back, I always find more." His hand reached out, long and skeletal, his fingers tipped with blackened, sharp nails. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something shift inside me, like a thread being pulled, unraveling the very fabric of my being. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, with a sudden snap, the lights blazed back on. The Phantom was gone. The stage was as it had been before. The grand set, the ornate chandeliers, the audience seats, all restored to their former glory. The actress lay on the stage again, her throat uncut, her body peaceful as if she had merely fainted. The blood that had dripped from the ceiling was gone. The twisted figures vanished into thin air. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. I could feel the weight of his presence still lingering in the air, thick and oppressive like a hand closing around my throat. I could still hear that faint whisper, like the ghost of a scream trapped just beneath the surface. I took a step forward, my legs shaking beneath me, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Was it a hallucination? A dream? But the fear was too real, too visceral to be a mere trick of the mind. And then I saw it. The mask. It lay on the floor, half hidden beneath the stage curtain. Not the elegant white mask of the legend, but the twisted bone-like one I had seen on the Phantom's face. I reached down, hesitating, my fingers trembling as I brushed against its surface. It was cold, so cold it burned. The moment my hand touched it, I felt it, a searing pain shooting through my arm like ice and fire all at once. I recoiled, gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. The mask moved. It slithered like something alive, pulling itself across the floor. And then it stopped. I backed away, horror gripping my throat as the mask slowly lifted itself, hovering in the air for a moment before turning, facing me. And then it spoke. In the same voice, the voice I had heard in the darkness, it rasped, "You're next." The lights flickered. The air grew heavy. and then the chandelier above me groaned, a low metallic creak that sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up, just in time to see it start to swing faster, harder, before it came crashing down. I barely had time to scream before the world went dark. This wasn't over. This had only just begun. I woke to darkness. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone, a cold, suffocating must that clung to my skin like a second layer. My head throbbed, my body ached, and when I tried to move, I found that I couldn't. My arms, my legs, they were bound, held tight by something rough and unyielding. Panic rose in my chest as I struggled against the restraints, but the more I fought, the tighter they seemed to hold. And then I heard it, the scraping of metal against stone, slow and deliberate, echoing through the darkness. I stopped moving, my breath shallow, my heart thudding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. The scraping grew louder, closer, until finally, I saw a dim light flickering at the edges of my vision. It wasn't bright enough to reveal much, but I could see the outline of a figure, a tall, hulking shape moving toward me with unnerving grace. The light swung slightly as it came closer, and that's when I saw what was casting it. A lantern, held in the hand of the figure. Its glow flickered weakly, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the walls. I tried to speak, to shout, but my throat was so dry that all I managed was a hoarse whisper. The figure stepped into the light, and my blood turned to ice. It was him. The Phantom. Only this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, shadows moved, creeping along the walls like living things. They writhed and twisted, their forms barely distinguishable in the dim light, but I could feel their eyes on me. They weren't human, not anymore. The Phantom's mask was back, that grotesque, bone-like grin that seemed to mock everything it looked at. His eyes, still hollow pits of blackness, bore into me as he knelt down beside where I was bound. He said nothing at first, just stared, as if studying me, as if waiting for something. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rasp that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. "I told you," he whispered. "You were never meant to leave." I struggled again, pulling at the ropes that held me, but they didn't budge. My heart raced, every beat a hammering reminder of how helpless I was. "You've seen it now," he continued, his hand brushing lightly against the side of my face. His touch was ice cold, his skin rough like old leather. "The truth, this place, this opera house, it's more than just stone and marble, it's alive, and it demands a sacrifice." I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, choking me as the weight of his words settled over me. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket, suffocating. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and gestured to the shadows behind him. "Do you see them? They were like you once, curious, foolish. They thought they could uncover the secrets buried here, but now they belong to me." The shadows shifted, and for the first time I saw them clearly. The cast, the dead performers. Their faces were pale, their bodies twisted, their eyes vacant. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, their limbs stiff like marionettes controlled by unseen strings. And then I realized they were still alive. Barely. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Only the silent, tortured expressions of souls long trapped, held captive by the Phantom's twisted will. I could see the agony in their eyes, the desperation. They were prisoners of the opera house, just like I was. The Phantom turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not malice, not rage, something worse. Amusement. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice soft, almost tender. "You can't leave. You belong to the opera house now, just like them." My mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to escape. I wasn't going to let myself be another victim of this madness, another puppet for the Phantom to control. But as I scanned the room, looking for anything that could help me, I saw it, the mask. It lay on the floor just a few feet away, glinting faintly in the dim light. It was the same mask that had spoken to me, the same one that had warned me, cursed me. But now, it was different. Its edges seemed to shimmer, and for a brief moment I felt something like hope. I reached out, straining against the ropes that bound me, my fingers brushing against the mask. The moment I touched it, a searing pain shot through my arm, but I didn't let go. I couldn't. I had to know. I had to understand. The Phantom watched me, his expression unreadable. "It won't help you," he said. "Nothing can help you now." But I didn't stop. I grabbed the mask, clutching it tightly in my hand despite the pain, and as I did, I felt something shift. The air around me seemed to change, growing heavier, darker. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing as if in agony, and the Phantom's eyes, those empty black pits, narrowed in confusion. Suddenly the mask moved. It began to melt, twisting and reshaping itself in my hand, growing hotter and hotter until it burned like fire. I screamed, the pain unbearable, but still I didn't let go. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the pain stopped. The mask was gone, I looked up panting, my hand still burning from where the mask had been. The phantom was staring at me now, his expression twisted into something between rage and fear. He began, his voice faltering. What have you done? Before I could answer, the ground beneath me began to tremble. The walls of the opera house groaned, the stone cracking and splitting as the entire building seemed to shudder. The shadows screamed, their bodies contorting and twisting as they were pulled back into the walls, vanishing one by one. The phantom staggered backward, his eyes wide with terror. No, he screamed, his voice shrill and panicked. No, this isn't possible, you can't. But before he could finish, the ceiling above us began to crumble. Pieces of stone and plaster rained down, and the floor beneath me gave way. I fell, tumbling into the darkness below, my body weightless as the world around me collapsed. And then everything went silent. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the ground outside the opera house. It was daylight now, the sun casting long shadows across the broken, crumbling facade of the once grand building. People were gathering around, pointing, whispering. I stood, dazed, looking at my hand where the mask had once been. It was gone. The opera house was gone. And the phantom, he was gone too. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, faint, barely a whisper on the wind. You'll never leave. And in the shattered glass of a nearby window, I saw it, the mask.